Welcome to another episode of A Quest for Twice. Today is October the 14th. I'm going to do a deep dive in Alphabet Inc., also known as the parent company of Google. Google as a company really needs very little introduction. So let's look at Google's revenue in the last 9 years, as shown in this graph on this slide. Alphabet has been growing its revenue at a CAGR almost 20% in the last 9 years. We can see that 2020 was below trend, likely due to the pandemic, and 2021 was above trend. What's interesting is its gross margin. So in the recent several years before 2021, the gross margin has been declining from a peak of more than 60% in 2015 to the low of about 54% in the year of 2020. So what has caused the decline? I'm going to discuss that later, but first let's look at the different segments in Alphabet. The main segment is a service segment with 90% of its revenue from advertisement, including house names like Google Search, YouTube, and other channels. And Google Cloud has about 10% of the market share in the public cloud. It also has a segment called Other Bets, which includes Nest, which is related to smart homes, Verily, related to health, Google Fiber, Waymo, related to self-driving cars, and others. So we can look at the segment revenue contributions in 2018 versus 2021 in this ring chart on the top right. So the outset is 2021 revenue contribution, 92% from service segment and 8% from Google Cloud. Compared to 2018, the Google Cloud revenue contribution was probably around 4%. In other words, Google Cloud has been growing very fast and taking up a larger share in the total revenue. So let's take a look at those two segments. The top right shows the Google Cloud revenue in the last 5 years. Its CAGR is almost 40%. And also very nicely that the revenue growth follows the trend line very well with very little deviation. Comparing that to the revenue from Google services in the last 5 years, we can see the revenue CAGR was about 19%. However, 2020 was significantly below trend and 2021 was above trend. That's because of the impact from the pandemic and causing advertisement pullback in 2020 and a catch-up effect in 2021 due to the economy reopening. It's very interesting to observe that the Google services operation margin, as shown in the orange line at the bottom right, was quite consistent before 2021, hovering around 33%. Then let's take a look at the recent revenue and margin trend, as shown in the figure on the bottom left. So the gray bars are the Google service revenues, and the orange bars are the Google Cloud revenues. We can see that the services revenue takes the lion's share of the total revenue. It's hard to see on this bar chart, but the Google Cloud is still growing very fast. Now let's look at the recent Google services operation margin. So it has been increasing from Q3 of 2020, around 34%, to a peak 1 year later at 40%. Then it has declined to about 36 to 37% in 2022. That's still significantly higher than 33% before the pandemic. So what about profitability? So this chart shows the operating margin from the different segments. We can actually see that the gray bars as operating margin from Google services were significant and positive. And all the other segments actually had operating losses. In 2017, Google Cloud had a significant operating loss, and that loss narrowed in the recent years. That's why the total income from operations, as shown as the green line, is actually less than the operating income from Google services. I believe this gain versus loss from different segments explains the phenomena we observed earlier in declining gross margin, because Google Cloud is having operating loss, and its revenue contribution has been growing. As a result, I believe that's behind the reason the gross margin has been declining in recent years. So is it a good thing or a bad thing for the Google Cloud to grow in revenue but losing money? That's why I also plotted the return on invested capital before tax in the same chart. The axis is on the right hand side and shown as the purple line. So you can see that the ROIC is usually around 22%. If we average the return ratio from 2020 and 2021 to smooth out the impact from the pandemic. In other words, Google has been getting high return from its investment in its different segments, including Google Cloud. Therefore, I conclude it's a good thing for Google to continue to grow its cloud segment. Now, let's take a look at the valuation. In this chart, I plotted the enterprise value versus operating income as the orange line for the last 9 years. We can see that it usually hovered above 20, and with a high about 26 in the year of 2020. But in this year, it declined to just below 15, mostly due to the significant market decline this year, while Alphabet is still growing its operating income. However, as I mentioned earlier, Google Cloud has been having operating losses, so that artificially depressed the total operating incomes. If we think the Google Cloud revenue is a good thing, then that's contradictory to the approach of using enterprise value over operating income, because if using the less operating loss from the last several years, then the valuation metric would look more attractive with the lower multiple. Because of this rationale, I also calculated adjusted operating income by assuming 30% operating margin for its cloud business, which is consistent with the Amazon.com reported the operating margin for AWS. I also neglected the losses from other bets because I consider those as a long-term investment. So with that adjustment, I recalculated the enterprise value over adjusted operating income. So we can see the multiples are always lower than without adjustment. Another change is the ratio in 2020 is actually less than the ratio in 2015. That's different from the results without adjustment. I think that makes sense because it's a Google Cloud business has been contributing more to its overall valuation and should deserve a lower multiple in the year of 2020 compared to 2015. But the overall conclusion is the same. The enterprise value over operating income, adjusted or without adjustment, has rarely been cheaper. So does the cheap valuation reflects fundamental changes to Alphabet's business? So let's review the threats and the opportunities. I do see short-term foreign exchange headwind given that the dollar is very, very strong, and Google has its total revenue from foreign sales as over 50% of its total revenue. So the strong dollar would depress its revenue growth as well as operating income. Also, there has been a significant advertisement market slowdown in this year with the recession looming, so that the slowdown may continue and get worse in the rest of this year and next year. But to me, the more important is its a long-term outlook. The key question is, are we seeing the end of the runway for digital advertisement? Although it is a threat, I see no evidence that is true. However, I do need to admit my limitation in my understanding of the digital advertising business. There is another risk from other bets. On one hand, it can be considered as a threat if those are just wasted capital investing in some unrealistic ideas that will never pan out. But on the other hand, those could present long-term growth opportunities. For example, autonomous driving. I think there is a clear opportunity for Google to gain cloud market share because of its expertise in artificial intelligence. So I do have high confidence in its continuous fast growth in Google Cloud. Overall, I think the Google's valuation multiple has been unfairly punished because of the short-term headwind from foreign exchange as well as a looming recession. I think it has more than enough to compensate for that and discounted significantly the potential for much longer runway for digital advertisement and also very strong growth potential in the cloud market. I plan to add to my holding in the Alphabet Inc. stock. This concludes this episode of Quest for Twice. Until next time, happy investing.